The net zero con will leave millions of citizens dependent on state handouts. It isn't a theory, it's an agenda. There is no climate emergency. On air 24/7. This is today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the program. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Thank you for joining us for this live broadcast. We're still in hour number one here at the Patrick Henningsen Show on TNT, today's News Talk. And as you saw the clip before the break we shared with you, that was live in front of the high courts in London, where they're hearing the appeal, the final appeal, at least in the UK anyway, for Julian Assange's extradition to the United States. Joining us on the line right now, I want to bring Freddie Ponton onto the stage. Freddie, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm very good, Patrick. It's good to be here. Thank you.
It's great to be with you as well, Freddie. Now, first of all, we've got a few breaking stories to cover, of course. But first and foremost, Freddie, I want to get your reactions, get your opinion on the case, the Assange case right now. As it's breaking in London, this is the final appeal. We're perhaps, hours away or very soon, imminently, we might hear a decision either later today or tomorrow. We're not sure, but it's coming right down to the wire right now for Julian Assange. I just want to get your thoughts first on this, Freddie.
Well, I'm like everybody. We are basically hanging by a thread. I mean, this has been going on for so long, and I'm, obviously thinking about his Julian's second half, which is out there, and has been very, very loyal to the cause, and has been doing pretty much any trick in the book to trying to get him out. So the British government is under pressure. There's no doubt. I mean, there's an appetite out there, and people would like to see some form of justice. And as I was listening to your clip, rightly so, saying that this is an attack on journalism, there's absolutely no doubt about that. And we know the intelligence community and the Pentagon, the defense complex in the United States, will go to serious extent to get hold of Julian Assange. Nothing has changed so far. So really, it's really in the hands of the British administrations and justice systems to stand for the right of journalism, for human rights as well, because I think that Julian has gone and has been punished way too much, and I think it's time to let him go. So the idea of extraditing to the United States is simply not only ludicrous, it's unfathomable.
It is. This is a very big precedent case, Freddie, because he's not a U.S. citizen. So, why on earth, how can the United States extradite him for a crime that he did not commit in the United States? He's unconvicted as it stands right now. But yet the long arm of justice of Washington pretty much dictates the terms of people's human rights internationally now, whether they have them or not. It's really up to the whims of Washington, Freddie. So from that point of view, any journalist anywhere in the world could suffer the same fate if they allow this to happen to Julian Assange. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the British has been really sending some very bizarre message, over the years, and we can see there's a double standard here. It's I compare it to Sunak, to trying to tell people that the British government is doing everything they can to put an end to the war and to get a ceasefire immediately, but on the other side they are voting and abstaining, during a vote resolution presented by the Algerian yesterday. So again, we're getting basically to ring a bell here, and it's saddened me to see the British government is falling so behind and are so influenced by the United States policies and gains and whatever they can advantage they can draw from this relationship. And it is time really for them to step up and show that there is a certain line that shouldn't be crossed. And I think this one is a serious one. And we can just cross fingers because the dice has been thrown.
You know what's amazing about this? The timing of this, Freddie, is pretty incredible because Julian Assange hasn't been present physically in the court. Reports are, at least Craig Murray, who's been following this case extremely closely for the longest time and a close confidant of Julian Assange himself. He said that Julian was not physically able to attend the court because of health reasons. That's what Craig was led to believe when he inquired about this. So he's being held in a supermax prison. This is where they keep the hardcore terrorists, the serial killers, and the mass murderers in Belmarsh prison. So his health is declining. And this is all happening after the wake of the death of Alexei Navalny, the Russian political dissident, you could call him. Other people call him other things, but he dies in prison this week. The timing is really incredible. So they're now saying, well, this could never happen in a democratic country like the U.S. or, the U.K. or France. But yet we have this case with Assange. Is totally glaring, the hypocrisy of this. So who are they to basically say anything about what other countries are doing, much less Russia, when we have this 13-year arbitrary detention in total? That's according to the UN, by the way. Niels Melzer, the special rapporteur on torture, 13 years arbitrary detention of a journalist for his crime of exposing war crimes, Freddie?
Look, it is what it is at the end of the day. We all know what we are standing against. I'm a European citizen, so I know that my countries and Europe has been overtaken by the United States, whether it's foreign policies or economic will. We under basically the United States hammer, and all I can wish for and hope for is that Julian is not going to pay the price for this very old imperial, empire style kind of way of making an example of someone, in order to intimidate the others, because we won't be intimidated, and they need to rest assured of that. Whatever happened, we're going to double down on whatever, to expose these people, because that's enough now. These people needs to be held accountable, and they have a lot to answer for. So we need to stand our ground, stand with Julian, and hopefully everything will go for the best.
Now, speaking of free press and free speech, we're also led to believe this week that you have a crisis brewing in Europe. In fact, in your home country, the Macron regime, increasingly unpopular, seems to be making yet another end run around the constitutional rights of the French people. This seems like an affront on free speech itself. Please explain what's going on here, Freddie, because we saw a lot of this during the COVID farrago and with the vaccine rollout, which has turned out to be a total disaster for everybody involved, much less the people of France to begin with. But what is going on this front right now in France? Explain.
Well, it's very worrying at this moment in time. Over the past 10 days, France has been involved in many discussions surrounding the bill, which was aimed at strengthening the fight against sectarian abuses and improving support for victims. Or that is what it claims on the surface. But some people have actually called this new bill the new law, the Pfizer law. So that's how just get you an idea of what we're talking about here. I think first what we can do is, perhaps many people are not even familiar with the term sectarian abuses. So to define that and then move on to what this bill is offering or pretend to offer, and looking at really the inconsistency and what is actually outrageous in this bill. First, the sectarian abuses, Patrick, refers to the abuse of the state of weakness of a person in a state of psychological or physical subjection, which results from the exercise of repeated, basically, pressure. What they are describing by this is basically the influence that comes out of gurus, of charlatans, or anyone that is in a position of influence and that can incite someone basically to abandon a treatment or refuse a treatment and even entertain alternative treatments, and that is exactly what it's about. So this bill comes down from a multinational strategy which has been outlined for 2023 and 2027, and it's the result of a conference on sectarian abuses which started last year in 2023. Now it's interesting because it's presented by a lady called Sabrina Agresti-Roubache. She's a sub-ministerial member of the French government. And she's basically coined the term Guru 2.0, which she described as the kind of the phenomenon of influence and influencers, which the bill is pretending or claiming to combat. So this is obviously a major step in the French government and an instrument for the legislators to basically strengthen their arsenal as far as combating basically anyone that is going to basically fight or try to fight basically the accepted narrative within the government, or in what I call the public-private gangsterships between the big pharma and the public sectors, which deliberately basically is willing to impose mandates, but also treatments which are not being proven yet to be efficient, or that also at some stage been described as dangerous or harmful. And so it's an attack, as I say, on the influencers. And it's been really well described as well by different entities within the government, which are responsible to review the text of this bill. And that's a very interesting thing, because nobody has to believe what I'm saying. All we need is to believe what the government is saying in this particular instance. And so, Patrick, what we have here is over the past year, when this bill was only a text and it was submitted to the State Council of France, which is responsible to review the text of this particular bill, came with some conclusion that was very interesting, because very quickly they saw that there was some problem with this bill. And there was really two major elements that they recommended and recognized as problematic. The first one was actually the name of the bill itself, since the context and the contents of this bill is mainly referred to the actual influencers and the ability for influencers to exercise pressures via the social media network. So there's really nothing about sectarian abuses. We're not talking about charlatan that's trying to sell you lemon juice and mix with kiwi to treat cancer.
So you're not talking about Reverend Jim Jones passing out the Kool-Aid at Jonestown. So what they're trying, it seems to me, Freddie, that they're trying to demonize what they're probably going to, whatever the translation is, conspiracy theorist people online that are making people skeptical of, let's say the word. Can we say the word? Let's say it. Vaccines. Or they're not even vaccines. Let's call them mRNA experimental gene jabs. Let's just, use another term. So they're afraid that people will find out information on the internet, on social media, that might kind of push them to maybe question the safety and efficacy of these experimental pharmaceutical products. Is that not what's going on here?
It's pretty much what it is, but it's well disguised. You have to kind of admire the ability for these guys to use the term sectarian abuses when clearly it is about freedom of speech. And more importantly, as I said, they should have called this bill the Professor Didier Raoult's bill, because this is, as I say, perhaps 25% of this bill is really about censorship and social media and trying to more like intimidate anyone which would dare kind of, start to complain or point the finger at the governments and their eccentricity when it goes down to treatments because of their cahoot and their coercion by the big pharma. So that's the one part, but it's only 25% really of the bill. When you really dive really deep into the bill, what you realize is actually this is a bill about stopping any professor, any kind of intellectual scientist, immunologist, biologist, anyone that has actually knowledge on the topic to recommend alternative therapy. So they demonize it by calling it Guru 2.0, which is a term that was coined by this lady, Sabrina Agresta-Roubache. Funny enough, she's from Marseille, exactly as same as Professor Didier Raoult, and she also actually fell sick on March 2020, and she was treated by hydroxychloroquine by Didier Raoult when she was a simple citizen, and now she's in the government promoting a Guru 2.0 bill, which is clearly going after anyone that is going to propose alternative treatments which were successful, which were basically very inconvenient for the government and big pharma. So that's what we are looking at here, and especially everything that I just say is encapsulated in an article, which is Article 4. And what's very important here, Patrick, is to understand that the government itself has recognized with its recommendation coming out of the State Council that Article 4 is actually not acceptable simply because it is in direct opposition of Article 11 of the 1789 Constitution of France, which is all about protecting freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So putting in the text, in this bill, a text that is completely in contradictions with Article 11 is something that they couldn't accept. So they recommended basically to chuck out this Article 4 from the bill, which was successful. I mean, there was a lot of pressures coming from various bodies and independent body in France saying that this is unconstitutional, this got to go away. And they managed to do that. And the bill, the Article 4 disappeared from the bill until last week, 48 hours before this bill is presented in the floor of the National Assembly. This bill suddenly is reappearing, is reemerging out of nowhere. And they are basically bringing it back, telling, well, we just put it back because we thought it needed to be there. We're just going to retweak it, rewrite it a little bit, and then eventually we'll put it into the final bill. And it was voted upon and it was approved after 2 votes in the National Assembly. So absolutely, clearly shameful. Everybody's talking about basically the lobbying, the big pharma lobbying, government pushing for this particular Article 4 to be brought back because it is essential. How can you sell a product if someone's coming with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin that are super cheap drugs against these big pharma that want to coin billions, selling us something that we barely know what it is, a new platform, a new technology, and something that clearly today has left a lot of people behind with, serious, grave or minor side effects. So the question is really today is what will be France's reaction as a whole? Are we going to fight this Article 4 now? Are we going to try to remove it from the bill? And the independent, the sovereignists like myself will be fighting for it, that you can be sure of.
Well, first of all, it's not a platform by any stretch of the imagination, because mRNA tech has just not been proven to actually do anything or work. I mean, in fact, they waived all of the requirements for that through the emergency use authorization because of the emergency. Save us from the virus, from the little COVID, the spikes. We need to be safe from that. So they had to waive all of the things that would have put Moderna and all these companies through their paces, trying to prove that this mRNA technology actually does anything. But they didn't have to do that, did they? Because it was such an emergency, Freddie. But you know what? You really hit the nail on the head, Freddie. The most important issue is that bill, that piece of legislation written by Pfizer and handed to the corrupt legislators, lobbying, absolute lobbying, that it wouldn't exist without big pharma pushing these government stooges to implement these sort of draconian measures. So that's really what we're dealing with here, is this out of control lobbying. And one might also ask the question, Freddie, are there American consultancy firms also basically drafting up these memos, the text for these legislations on behalf of the likes of Pfizer and others? And I think you've already exposed the fact that that's more than likely the case, isn't it, in France?
Well, Patrick, in this particular case, I think we've hammered it so hard with regards to, the interference of this consultancy firm like McKinsey's and others, which interfere with big government business, of course. But in this particular instance, they didn't have to do that because they had actually an inside person to bring that particular Article 4 onto the table, onto the bill. And this lady is very close to Macron. She's a Macron supporter. Her name is Brigitte Lizotte, and she happened to have worked for a pharmaceutical giant known as GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and she's believed to be at the origin of the written of Article 4, if you will. And she brought that back onto the sectarian abuses topic, prohibiting basically criticizes of big pharma. So she never declared that. Nobody was aware that she was a former GSK employee. So it's really interesting to see that lady using her position and perhaps, as an insider bringing that bill, which, obviously works in favor of big pharma.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You got to call this stuff out as it's happening, Freddie. But I'm worried, for you, Freddie, that someone might accuse you of being a guru 2.0 there, especially you're in the same neighborhood as.
Be careful. You got to be
and the
careful
beard, and you're around the corner from Dr. Didier Raoult. So it just doesn't. It all adds up. Sounds like trouble, Freddie. Really, Guru 2.0. Freddie Ponton.
Definitely. He's my neighbor, so as I say, whether it's the simple Joe like myself, independent journalist that's trying to make some noise, and we get punished for it. During the COVID, I was taken down on several occasions. The thing is, I managed to find out who actually was asking for me to be taken down. Once was the German government, another time was the Norwegian government. So I know governments were pretty active. And then during my investigation on the NATO and their involvement with the vaccination rollout in Europe, I got hammered a couple of times. So I've gone through that. I've got the T-shirt. Let's put it that way. But my concern is that now, if this is going to intimidate scientists, expert doctors, those that actually have scientific knowledge, that should be basically taken into consideration in a democracy, or so-called democracy, where there's a freedom of speech, where knowledge, expertise can be shared across the board, so that we have access to the best treatments, based on the best expertise. And that has to be apolitical. It has to be really bipartisan. It has not to be political at all. It's about science. It's about actually opening the debate. This is what science is all about. It's about allowing the debate, the confrontation, and even the disagreement, so that we can better ourselves. We can better the treatment, the technology, in order to serve humanity. And if you don't let this discourse take place, then of course, you're refusing half, basically, of the knowledge that is available to you. And it's also basically destroying the trust, the confidence that the public has put into our institutions.
Well put, Freddie, because at the end of the day, we just want a fairer, more just, more effective, and more common sense government. That's what people are asking for, Freddie. That's all we've been asking for from the beginning of all of these various crises. So it's not as if we don't have an objective and some light at the end of the road on this, but it seems like there's a lot of resistance against that, especially at the elite echelons of government. I'm with Freddie Ponton, independent journalist based in France. We're covering very important key stories right now this week. However, let's take a break right now with TNT, today's news talk. And when we come back, more on Macron. I want to talk about that with Freddie, a news story that's crept up, how that relates to, let's just say, the situation in Gaza, and a whole lot more on the other side. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Stick around. We'll be right back.
De-weaponizing weather with reality and perspective.
I want you to consider this about the Trump verdict and the climate change agenda. In a nutshell, someone who had to jump through hoops to get financing. Think about what you have to do to just get financing for your house, who made astronomical amounts of money for those people that loaned him the money, created jobs, created actual entities that benefited society, has been found guilty of fraud by people who never created a thing in their lives. And so they try to bankrupt him. And the fact that this is okay with a large segment of the population, whether you love or hate Donald Trump, is a sign, unless this stops, the United States is finished. It's the Michael Mann verdict on steroids. Complete disregard for the facts. It stinks to high heaven, which I can't believe the people who are doing this believe in by their actions. What does this have to do with the climate change agenda? Should be a warning shot to anyone refusing to play ball. JP Morgan is waking up. They've pulled out a $63 trillion Climate 100 organization, which are a bunch of major financial entities that are all in for using climate to reshape the new world order. Well, I have news for JP Morgan. If others wake up and start leaving, you're going to find you're in the Hotel California finance with this. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. This is TNT climate and weather watchdog meteorologist Joe Bastardi asking you to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you've got.
Patrick Henningsen talks on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. You're listening to TNT, Today's News Talk, and watching TNT, Today's News Talk, live and direct right now. And we're talking with international journalist Freddie Ponton on the line right now. Freddie, and obviously the issue of free speech, which we've covered in the previous segment, especially as relates to the imposition of forced medical treatments or coerced medical treatments by the state. Yes, that happened, folks. If you missed that one, you must have been on another planet over the last 3.5 years. But the Emmanuel Macron has also come into the news again. This is an interesting story, Freddie, and I think I've flagged this because it does have a direct relation to the genocide in Gaza right now, as the Israelis continue to move on Rafah right now. Incredible situation. I'll probably get your comment on that, but it's kind of a controversy. France honors foreign resistance fighters as World War II hero. Manouchian is inducted into the Pantheon, this World War II war hero pantheon here. So somewhat controversial. This is over a D-Day commemoration ceremony here. But I think it's interesting, this issue of how do you define a resistance fighter? Well, certainly we know from history, resisting the Nazi occupation is something that we lionize. In fact, we erect monuments to such things still today. We maintain those monuments in perpetuity because those resistance fighters were freedom fighters, in fact. But they were regarded by the Nazi occupiers in Vichy France as terrorists. We'll get to that conversation in a moment, Freddie, but what do you think about this latest story?
Well, yeah, Manouchian was a poet, from Armenia. So it's an interesting choice of country as well. And he found refuge in France. He was executed in 1944 by the Nazi regime. But this is someone that basically incarnates, if you will, the very fundamental principle of what it is to be a resistance, what it is to be someone that defends it's not only his country, but what this country stands for, which is freedom, liberties, and the right of self-determination. So for me, when I see Macron getting involved in this, he's obviously surfing a very thin line here. But I think his messaging is signaling clearly that, fighting against oppressive regime is not a small business, and often people pay with their lives. And I think he's going to basically elevate the memory of this person in order for him to be written in the history of France as part of history. France has had a long relationship with the Armenian. We've always been defending the Armenians and been very close to them. There's many Armenian people in France. So this is a topic, and the topic of genocide is something that France has been familiar, has some kind of that are familiar with, if you will. And of course, everyone today in France is on the same page. doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum in today. I think it's quite clear the message from France at the moment is that we want a ceasefire. I think the French president has been clear now for more than 3 weeks that he has always went along with resolution. The last one with Algeria at the United Nations Security Council. The French ambassador to the UN also went along with the resolution to ask for a permanent ceasefire. So I think this is great to see that. At least we see France where they need to be, which is on the side of human rights, on the side of international law. And I think this is just an extension of France showing a little bit the finger at the United States and also historically marking some points. So all good.
And it's a quote here from the French president's office here. Misak Manouchian chose France twice. First, as a young Armenian who loved Baudelaire and Victor Hugo, and then through the blood he shed for our country, said the office of the French president Emmanuel Macron in a statement last year surrounding the Pantheon homage. But this gets back to that issue, isn't it, Freddie? We look back historically here. Clearly, these are freedom fighters resisting an illegal occupation. In the case of the Nazis, resisting a genocide, because who knows how far they would have gone if they were allowed to have free reign over the rest of Europe. And so they regard them as heroes. They regard them as liberators, as resistance, legal resistance, rightful resistance. But that's not the case with the illegal Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories, which is internationally recognized as an illegal occupation. But the resistance fighters in Palestine are regarded as terrorists in the very same way the Nazis regarded the French resistance as terrorists. Have I got anything wrong in my history here, Freddie?
No, not at all. I mean, you know me well enough to know that my family were resistance. So it's for us. I grew up around people that were prisoner of war. That have been fighting the Nazi regime, my uncles and so on. So we're more than patriotic. As I say, we're sovereignists. You come to our country, we're going to fight you. There's no doubt about it. Doesn't matter we lose, we die. It's irrelevant. What matters is that we're going to stand, to protect our land, to protect our values, and to protect our women and children. And I think that by saying these words, I think we can transpose this word to what the Hamas is doing. And we see more and more people looking at Hamas as basically an organization that is just trying to fight back so that they can get their land back, they can get their territories back and their dignities back. I think they've suffered long enough. They went through 56 years of occupation, completely illegal settlements. I mean, we saw, and we have, everything is written. We have enough, over 100 United Nations resolutions that describe how illegal these settlements and the occupation is. We don't need more a legal instrument to demonstrate, that the siege on Gaza was already a genocide, as Ocampo, former ICC chief prosecutor, described. So we have the evidence today. It's not a matter of, the lack of proof or evidence that not only a genocide is being committed as we speak, but that this has been going on and tolerated only simply because the United States, unfortunately, has provided Israel with a shield to international law, a shield to basically accountability. And one person that I was listening to, I forgot his name, but he actually made a very interesting statement referring to one of the articles of the United Nations Charter, which really expose any states which acting against or trying to go and undermine international law and the UN charters will subject itself to be removed from the United Nations by the rest of the United Nations General Assembly. So there is a possibility here, because we are seeing a lot of consensus amongst the members of the United States, the United Nations, and we can see that everyone is, in accord to get a permanent ceasefire right now. So if the UNGA is absolutely in agreement with that, nothing stopping them for now looking at Israel, which I think has a resume that speaks for itself as far as, working and acting in direct contravention of the UN resolution, and the United States that is providing the shield and that is still refusing basically to agree on an obvious genocide and an obvious need for an immediate ceasefire. No truce, no temporary, just a permanent ceasefire, because diplomacy has failed. And to resume diplomacy, you need ceasefire. And to apply, of course, the ICJ provisional measures, which was ordered by the ICJ court, you also need a ceasefire. I mean, things are pretty clear. And I think that the latest resort for the UNGA is to maybe perhaps starting to show that the United States is not above the law.
Well, we're going to have international human rights lord Mohammed Akunji on the program in the next hour. I'm looking forward to that discussion. Like the provisional ruling, as you said, from the International Courts of Justice, that it is the plausible case of genocide is in fact happening right now as we speak in Gaza, but also beyond as well, but in Gaza specifically. And that said, Israel hasn't pulled back. They haven't scaled down their operations, Freddie. Quite the contrary. They seem to be ramping up for another push in Rafah. You have all these vulnerable people, hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians, they're getting ready to be pushed into the Sinai Desert by force by Israel. What do you make of this situation?
Well, it's very interesting in terms of looking at what Israel army is doing at the moment. And we saw that a few days ago that the engineering corps of the IDF is actually building a buffer zone just south of Khan Yunis to split basically the Gaza Strip in half. And to isolate completely the people in the north part of the Gaza Strip, so that the aid that's been humanitarian aid, health support, nothing is going to make it into the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and that's sending a very strange message to me, because we know that Israel has basically confirmed, and is boosted about the fact that they were in complete control of the northern part of Gaza City and the Gaza Strip. So this is where supposedly Hamas had his strongest headquarters, in hospitals, and that there was the stronghold of Hamas was basically the northern part of the Gaza Strip. So why building a buffer zone, a complete road that has been built and will basically be a tarmac road very soon, to split the Gaza Strip in half? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And the only way I can explain to that is that they do not control the northern part of Gaza. They've lied about that, and they're worried that if they're going to attack basically Rafah and Khan Yunis and continue this complete operation and bombardments and ground operation in this particular southern part of the Gaza Strip, they might get flanked or they might get attacked behind them, because still a lot of Hamas people are actually still in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and they will be able to attack the IDF by the back. So to avoid that, they need to create a buffer to protect their back or to be flanked. So that's what I look at it from a strategic military point of view, because nothing is making sense or otherwise. And then the rest, of course, is, as you said, the Philadelphia Accord, allowing basically Israel and obviously Egypt to have a control over the Rafah border crossing, which of course is in the hands of some very dodgy characters. I've mentioned that about it, and there was some great article written about it, about the Argamani Peninsula, this unbelievable guy that seems to be operating and controlling the entire Sinai, and his company is being contracted by the we don't know really, Egyptian government, maybe some British, we don't know, but they are building basically a logistic hub. Massive walls have been erected in order to enclose what, if not basically the Palestinians that the Israeli is trying to truck out of the Gaza Strip. So these are very, very dangerous, very sensitive time, and people are watching, and I'm worried that if one move on the Rafah border killed and start to kill civilians, which will basically press upon the gates, and the gates will eventually be open, we will see a large exodus, if you will, of the Palestinian population into this hub. So the only reason why they've not attacked in mass, if you will, with really strong military presence within Rafah, it's simply because this logistic hub or this new prison has not been finished yet. So I think they're just buying a little bit of time. But Ramadan, as they said, they might be in a position to do that.
That would just be so inflammatory. You and I both know the message that sends to attack during Ramadan. It's literally they're going to be throwing a match into a giant oil refinery. That's the equivalent. Benny Gantz was gloating and saying that they're going to do this just on television the last 24 hours. So anybody who thinks Benny Gantz is some sort of a dove or some sort of a moderate version of Netanyahu, think again. He is just as much of a cold-blooded killer as Benjamin Netanyahu and the other sort of radicals, unfortunately, that are in the ascendancy right now in the Likud government in Tel Aviv. So we got to keep a close eye on that. Of course, Freddie, you're absolutely right. What a dire situation this is. We'll talk about that in the second hour with our next guest. We're also going to be connecting with Trevor Fitzgibbons in just a minute or two, top of the hour. Freddie Ponton, thank you for joining us on TNT this week.